now listening to the Arsenal Therapy Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the 15-minute show, part of the Arsenal Therapy Podcast. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest in the form of Harry Symeou. Harry is a commentator for BBC London and TalkSport, and also runs the Chronicles of a Gunner podcast, which is an absolutely superb podcast that put him on the map and was one of the inspirations behind me doing this show. Harry, welcome to the show. How are you doing this morning?
Oh, that was a lovely intro, mate. I'm great. Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to talking Arsenal with you. And it's the summer and there's plenty of transfer chat, so there's always lots to get into, isn't there?
Absolutely. And today we're going to have a conversation about Arsenal's midfield rebuild, to be specific. It's one that you've had some reservations about, and I'm here to pick your brain on this. And I think that we've got some contrasting views, so it'll make for a really interesting conversation. You're someone that I really like the balance of your views. And like a lot of kind of positive Arsenal fans, we're accused of positive PR far too often. So it was interesting to see a bit of backlash whenever you weren't sure about Nørgaard specifically. But just overall, what are your opinions of these two? Because it's a big ask rebuilding the sixth position in one summer.
Yeah, and I think going into the summer, there was this kind of view that, you know, the only department that Arsenal really needed to strengthen in was attack. That was where it was at. That was what we needed to address. And I think it was actually overlooked by a lot of people how big a rebuild job we needed to do in the middle of the park. You know, we lost Jorginho first. That was clearly coming for some time. He wanted to go back to Brazil and play with Flamengo. And that just made loads of sense for Jorginho. That was always going to happen. With Thomas Partey, obviously, he's no longer an Arsenal player now. But at the time we were first linked with Christian Norgaard, there were still question marks about whether or not he was going to sign a new deal with the club. So I thought that keeping a hold of him, and I think things have happened since then that changed that. But at the time when we were discussing it, I felt like keeping a hold of him and allowing Martin Zubimendi to come in and maybe initially share that role with him was the best way of managing that transition. Now, as I mentioned, we're not going to get into it, but things have changed, okay, around that situation. And so my viewpoint has had to change as a result of that as well. But my initial feeling was that Zubimendi's going to need some time. He's going to need some time to adapt, and to ask him to come into a top-tier Premier League side as the main six was a big ask. And then you're looking at Christian Nørgaard, and I think he's a very decent Premier League midfield player, Brentford captain. It's clearly got leadership qualities. And when I think about what Brentford have achieved over the last few years, staying in the league first and foremost, that's remarkable for a club of that size. And he's obviously been a key component and a key part in that. I always felt like he could be a decent squad player, but my question was, is the midfield better? And that was what was constantly going around in my mind. I think it has the potential to be, but I still have some reservations about whether in the immediate sort of short term, Arsenal are much better off than they were last season. And obviously we've spent a hefty amount of money in doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, let's have a look at Zubimendi. So this stuff was put together on Arsenal.com. It's available on The Athletic as well, but it was line-breaking passes. This is something that Thomas Partey was very much known for at Arsenal, but Zubimendi is the man coming in to essentially do that role, be essentially the lone six, although I don't truly believe that is a position given the inversion of the left back, the 8 dropping deep. But that is the role tasked of Zubimendi, and we can see his passing numbers are up there with the very best in the world. And it's worth noting, he was playing in a Sociedad team that had an awful season last year. They really underperformed. So for Zubimendi to finish with 238 line-breaking passes in La Liga is pretty insane. You look at the company he's in there. Look at Modric, 40 years old, is still ranking up at the top of 275. You got Valverde in there. Interestingly, though, Valverde played a lot of his football at right back, where he had the freedom to play those passes down the line and really get in and play a bit more risk-free football, because he was in a position where you're not at risk of transition as much. Symeou as well, very good player, someone that I would have liked at Arsenal at one point. But when you look at this, what are your instant feelings towards Martin Zubimendi? Because I think we can't overlook the adaptation period that you've mentioned, but there are skills that we're certainly lacking in that midfield department.
I think Martin Zubimendi on a technical level is a top footballer. I've got no doubts about that whatsoever. And these statistics regarding line breaking passing really do back that up. So my reservation around him specifically was never really about what he could do with the ball at his feet. It was about the physical element and the physical aspect of the game. And I think, although I take your point on board about the left back inverting and the 8 having the ability to drop back and make it a 2 at times, I think when we are trying to break down low blocks, one of the weapons that we use is the ability to push both of our 8s onwards. And that restricts the ability of someone. I know Declan Rice is Superman fitness-wise, but that does restrict your ability to get back and cover. You also think about when we push the left back on, it means we've got a back 3, which means that we probably can't afford for any more of those players to step out of the shape because it leaves us vulnerable to the transition. And I think when you're a team that plays on the front foot, it's really important that your 6 has got the ability to line break, because that's really important, but also has the physical ability to be able to marshal a very big space a lot of the time by themselves. And why Thomas Partey for many, many years was very, very good in that role was because he had both. He could play the ball through the lines, but he could also do that defensive job as well. You look at Declan Rice when he plays as a 6, and I think he's brilliant at doing the defensive side, maybe not so good at progressing the ball through the lines. Feels like more of a carrier to me than a passer. And obviously passing gets you up the field quicker, doesn't it? Because the ball will always travel faster than you can. So I think for me, my question mark over Zubimendi is, how long is it going to take him to A, get to grips with what's a very, very important role in our team, and B, is he powerful enough to manage what he's going to face in the Premier League? I don't think it's about fitness per se. It's not about his ability to cover X amount of ground. I think he can do that. We've seen that. But it's about adapting, and it's about realizing that you're going to be playing in a completely different team, completely different players around you, different level of opposition. And I don't doubt that he will be a good signing for Arsenal. But coming into the first few weeks of the season where we've got some really difficult fixtures, very much is a kind of baptism of fire for him, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And one interesting thing with him, you mentioned different players around you. That is why it's so important having him in very early. He needs to get used to his teammates. That 6 role is what ties everything together in the team. You're one of the first receivers. You are a player that is responsible for looking up and distributing. And Zubimendi's a player that can progress on all 3 stages of the pitch. I'm going to have a look just at his passing numbers. Firstly, we will get back onto some of your physical concerns and the defensive side of the game. But if you look at this graphic The Athletic put together, it's his progressive passing with his line breakers in the different phases. You can see first phase, he's very, very good at getting that ball up the pitch. Predominantly, like most midfielders, the high percentage of his passes comes in that kind of middle third of the pitch where midfielders would have the most volume. To be honest, I expect graphic 1 to be much lower next season because we play with such a high line. And essentially, this second one is where he'll be starting to receive. And hopefully, the third and fourth ones will become a bit more condensed as he gets the ball more in that final third. But ultimately, he's a player that is a forward-looking player. He passes forward a lot. It's why his pass accuracy is around 84%, which isn't the highest for 6. Most 6s are looking around 92 to 96% because you do typically get a higher percentage of sideways and backwards passes. But Martin Zubimendi breaks the mold in that sense. He's more like Rodri. He wants to move it forward a lot. How much of an impact do you think that will have on our ability to break down low blocks? Because that was something that's clearly a concern of yours. It came up with the defensive side, but we also have an attacking issue when it comes to low blocks, mainly around too many touches at the base.
Yeah, for sure. I've long said that the way you get the best out of Bukayo Saka, Martin Odegaard, Gabriel Martinelli, and whoever it is that plays at centre forward for Arsenal is getting the ball to them early. You can't afford for teams when you win the ball back to be allowed to get back into a solid shape, to get back behind the ball, to double up in certain instances. You have to create those 1v1s. That's how your best players thrive. That's how they make things happen. It's no good taking 4 touches and then playing it out to Saka when you've won the ball back, because by the time he receives it, the fullback's back in the preferred position. He's probably got a DM that's come across to support him. He's probably got a centre-back coming out on the cover as well. And all of a sudden, Bukayo maybe has 3 players to deal with. So it's about getting the ball into these players, into their feet, as early as possible. And when you look at Martin Zubimendi's passing stats, you look at these passing maps that you're showing us here, all of that makes for really, really exciting reading. So as I say, I've got no doubt about what he can do on the ball and in possession. And I've got no doubt that if you fast forward 6 months down the line, we're going to turn around and say, this was a genius bit of business. But that adaptation period is the thing I keep coming back to. And on the wider point about the midfield build and stuff, that's why my opinion at the time was that we probably needed someone there that could share that role with him initially and just manage that whole transition differently. But listen, he's going to have to hit the ground running. And who's to say that he can't? Who's to say that he doesn't come in and be a real key and integral part of this team and perform at a really excellent level from the off? I hope that's the case. You hope that's the case. We all do. But obviously, with big change comes the potential of a transitional period, and comes the potential of things maybe not working as brilliantly as you'd like right from the off. And that's where the nervousness, I'd say it's more of a nervousness than a worry now for me. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, and interestingly, with our backup six, this is the player that you have raised some concerns about. Christian Nørgaard is coming in. You've already mentioned his leadership, but that nervousness, I think, is completely right. It would be worrying if none of us were nervous and we were overconfident, because this is a huge build. Liverpool did it a couple of years ago and it worked for them. It was only injuries that made Liverpool fall off in the 23-24 season, but they did rebuild their entire midfield that summer. And we are kind of doing that this year. But we do have Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard already in place. They changed essentially 3 positions that summer. But with us, we are bringing in Christian Nørgaard, who, whilst you've highlighted some of your concerns with Zubimendi defensively, there's one thing about Christian Nørgaard, and that is defensively, he's as astute as they come. So you look at possession one since 21-22, Norgaard 844 times. Only Declan Rice is higher, and he is actually miles ahead of everyone else in the league, which is pretty insane. But Norgaard's a player that's not the quickest, a bit like Zubimendi in that sense. But what Norgaard really thrives with is his positioning. He knows where to stand. He knows where to win the ball back. He knows how to time his challenge. But one thing that does concern me a bit with Norgaard is he is very, very aggressive. And we've seen players booked for very little in an Arsenal shirt. And we've also seen this player almost break Martinelli's leg. So give me your thoughts on this in terms of the defensive standpoint, and maybe the foil with Zubimendi in terms of the initial adoption period.
See, this is all very encouraging looking at the numbers, right? I've said this quite a bit recently. Like, I believe in statistical analysis, and I believe that it's a tool that we should use to help either kind of reinforce or disprove opinions. But the opinions should come from the eye test. For me personally, that's how
Agreed.
I analyze football. That's how I view football, right? But I think you've got to be careful with some of these statistics, because I think sometimes they can be a little bit misleading. If you play in a team that doesn't have the ball much, you are going to win possession back more than playing in a team that always has the ball. And I'd bet good money that a lot of those numbers on Rice, for example, possession one, would have been when he was in a West Ham shirt sitting at the base of the midfield. And I think with Christian Nørgaard, there's going to be a bit of that too, in that, you know, the numbers are probably not going to be as close in an Arsenal shirt, because for the vast majority of the time, we're going to have the ball, as opposed to being Brentford, sat sometimes with a back five, sometimes with a 5 in midfield in front of our defense and looking to win the ball back from teams that are trying to hurt us. So I think this is really encouraging, and you should look at this stuff and you should definitely take it into consideration, but it should be taken for what it is and understood in the context that it is. Because I think Christian, if he puts in possession winning numbers, even half of that in an Arsenal shirt, I'll be buzzing. I'll be over the moon. I'll be delighted. But I think now I'm looking at what Christian Nørgaard brings to the table on the ball, more so than off the ball. And I think that's where my mindset shifts when analysing a player from Brentford to now at Arsenal. And I think it's going to be a big change for him.
Yeah, well, just on that point, I had a quick look as you were talking. Brentford averaged 47.8% possession per game. Arsenal averaged 57%. It's actually surprisingly low that we've got, considering the amount of time it feels like that we spend around the edge of the box. But I think last year, those numbers probably dropped off in the second half of the season when we just didn't have the legs. And quite often we saw ourselves on the back foot in games, seeing them out. But with Norgaard, he is someone that also offers you threats from set pieces. This is clearly something that Arteta will like. He scored the most goals by midfielder, or most percentage of goals from set pieces from midfielders in the Premier League in recent years, and actually of all time, with Vinnie Jones being next. Norgaard is a threat in that area, but also he's a very good defensive player at seeing out corners. So in terms of the last 20 minutes of games, I see this as being an advantage to Arsenal, but I do agree with what you're saying on the ball. One of the things I've noticed about Norgaard when watching him, he's very efficient. He almost personifies Brentford. And you mentioned he's been there in the rise up the leagues, and kind of he came in the Championship, spent 2 seasons there, and he's been a key player in the heartbeat of that midfield, their captain. He releases that ball very quickly. He's very Thomas Frank in the way he plays, and he's very good at winning the ball back and springing a counter straight away. What his short game's like, I'm yet to see, because when I look at footage of him, that footage isn't available because Brentford don't play like that. So this is where your concerns, I feel, are completely valid. One thing I do wonder, though, is can those skills be very valuable to us in the last 20 minutes of games when we are starting to counter teams more, especially with the likes of Madueke and Gyökeres coming in who do like to run. But ultimately, we are projecting on this. He could come in, he looks great on the ball. He could also look very poor. So we are going to have to wait and see with that. But with Zubimendi and passing numbers, that's really not a concern. You look at the numbers, the number of passing sequences he's been involved in, and it ranks really highly, with only Valverde and Pedri ahead of him, 2 of the best midfielders in the world. Pedri, arguably the best. So Zubimendi is going to be a player that wants to be on the ball in all phases, as we know. But do you think that leads to any concerns? Because we are going from a player in Partey who was involved a lot, but wasn't so metronomic in that sense. He was more a player that liked to look up and make things happen, whereas Zubimendi will move it quickly, but ask for it back. Similarly, try to create space for runners. But he will be that very Spanish-style, regista type player in the middle.
Yeah, he will be, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's kind of what we could do with. I think that you can never have too much creativity in the team. And I think we always talk about creativity as being players that come alive in the final third, that play the final pass leading up to a goal. I think creativity needs to exist deep in your team nowadays. And I don't think there's many better than Martin Zubimendi at doing that and at creating. It doesn't have to be about creating goals. It can be creating 1v1s for your winger, creating 1v1s for your centre forward, putting the ball into the channel for someone to run into, putting the ball into the path of someone to make a line-breaking run. All of these things, for me, are still creativity. And I think whenever, there were times over the last few seasons where Thomas Partey looked great, and there were times where he didn't. And when he didn't, there was always that thing in my mind that went, maybe we should play Rice here. The Rice 6 or 8 debate has existed for a long, long time. But Rice doesn't have that creativity from deep. As great a player as he is, and he's a fantastic player, he doesn't have that. And so to have someone that can bring you that is great. And someone that can bring you that is going to help the team function better further up the pitch. And that is really, really important to me, because I think when we talk about Arsenal being a little bit predictable at times and struggling to break down low blocks, it's often because we take so long to work the ball into the final third that people have the time to reset. And having someone that can move it in theory quicker and more directly, and maybe cut out 1 or 2 of the build-up passes by just going straight through the lines, I think it's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, and if you look at Martin Zubimendi's open play touches, it kind of suggests he's a player that wants to go through the middle as well. He's a player that does like the left-hand side a bit more than Thomas Partey with the right. And just on your point about Thomas Partey last season, I felt that if you looked online, you would either hear that he was the best player on the pitch by a distance or the worst player.
Yeah.
Quite often, I felt it was somewhere in between. And I felt for a while he was a player that we could move on for him, particularly because of injuries. But we're now looking at Zubimendi, and he brings something different to the team. He is someone that moves the ball very, very quickly. One of the things that everyone focuses on is forward passing. I've obviously focused on it at the beginning of the show. But something that I think is equally important for a 6 is going sideways and backwards, but doing it very quickly. When we have, say, Declan Rice at 6, sometimes he will take 2, 3, 4 touches before going sideways or backwards. What I want from the 6 is spin it into your man very, very quickly, fizz it across the box into your fullback, and then move to receive again. Move it up the pitch that way. Andrea Pirlo was great at this. He just moved the ball around the pitch with ease. And I feel that Martin Zubimendi is someone that can do that. How much space he'll be able to eat up remains to be seen. He's 5'11". He's actually taller than I thought he was. I got a lot of stick for calling him diminutive on a show, but I am 6'4". So anyone below 6 foot to me is diminutive. But he's a player that he is very different in the kind of space-eating sense to some midfielders. And you look at his touches, they do happen all over the pitch, but primarily in that core 6 position. And his defensive actions as well. He can win the ball all over the pitch. You see the most congested ones in the box, but all around the pitch, he's a player that's very active, 275 defensive actions. So he's not scared of a tackle or a duel. He anticipates very well because he doesn't have the legs. There are a lot of similarities to Jorginho and a player like Pirlo in this, in the way that they have to think before they move, because if they dive in, they're gone. That ball straight past them. Suddenly, William Saliba, Gabriel, and everyone else at the back is scampering to try and make up because you've got your 6 out of position. But in terms of possession won back, so this is something that I do find very interesting. He won the possession back the second most times in La Liga last season with 94. I think you made a really good point about the team you're playing in with defensive actions. I mentioned Sociedad didn't have a good season last year. They lost Marino. They just kind of capitulated as a club and as a team. So Zubimendi did play a more defensive game. He wasn't going forward as much. They didn't score as many goals. So these defensive actions increased. But it does show that he is a player that's capable of winning the ball a lot. And I mentioned how cleanly he does it. So does this kind of give you any sense of comfort knowing that he's going to have to come in and adapt? But he is a player that, whilst being great in possession, is equally committed to his duels, which Arteta loves.
Well, you compared him there to Jorginho, and that's a comparison that I've made too in the past. So I completely agree with that. And I think that's a classic case of a player that is just on another level in terms of his intelligence and uses that as the way to kind of close the gap between himself and maybe some of the others that are a little bit more physically imposing. The fact that you're an intelligence first player, which is what I feel about Martin Zubimendi, gives me encouragement that he can adapt. But sometimes I just think that coming into the Premier League, it hits you like a ton of bricks because it is so different to other leagues. I think if you transition from Spain to Italy or Spain to Portugal, Spain to France, Spain to Germany, I think it's a much easier transition. But when you listen to players that have made that move, the first thing they talk about is the speed and the tempo and the difference in that. And I think that he will adapt because he's too intelligent not to. And he'll figure out in his own head what he needs to do slightly differently, where he can afford to take a touch, where he can afford to take a bit longer, and where he needs to just be a little bit sharper. And as you say, move the ball around the corners and you know, and how he's going to go about winning possession back. Timing is going to be everything. He's not going to go and barge massive players off of the ball constantly and do it the way that Declan Rice does it, for instance. He's got to find his own way. He's got his own tools and he'll understand what works best for him. But I just think, yeah, whatever way you look at it, Martin Zubimendi is a super intelligent footballer, will for certain, in my opinion, be a hit at Arsenal. The question is, how quickly can he make those adaptations? And that'll tell us a lot about the player and his intelligence as well, won't it?
Absolutely. And as mentioned with Norgaard, it's he is a player like Zubimendi that wins the ball back. In a slightly different stat about ball possession wins, he won it the third most times in the midfield area since 21-22. Again, Brentford do win the ball a lot back in this area and spring it forward. But if you look at the players ahead of him, Rodri and Rice, below him, Caicedo and McAllister. So actually, you're seeing top midfielders being in this category as well, playing in possession-based teams. So it will be very interesting how that translates to us. But ultimately, the big thing for me is we've got these two players in very, very early. They were there on the very first day of pre-season at Colony before they flew to Spain. And so they've been involved in everything going forward. They both know players at the club. Norgaard knows David Raya very well. Zubimendi spent a long time with Marino, played with Odegaard, has played with Raya at Spain as well. So these guys have got, I guess, friends within the group to help them settle. But the big question is, how are they going to help the two star men in the team in midfield with Martin Odegaard, who's just off the back of a poor season, and Declan Rice, who by contrast was our best player last season?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? I think we talk a lot about who we're bringing in. We focused a lot on the incomings. Actually, I think we need some stepping up to the plate from some of the players that we had there last season that maybe didn't always deliver. You're right in saying that, particularly in the second half of last season, Declan Rice was the man. I thought he was a little bit iffy in the first half by his very high standards, but he picked it up and he developed and he got back to where we expect him to be. Odegaard was poor. But if Odegaard can pick it up again and can link up with Zubimendi and those two form an understanding, and I know they've got an existing relationship already, and then you've got Marino in there as well, who will get some game time and again has that relationship with Martin Zubimendi, then our current players or the players that were there last season have a massive role to play, and them getting back to their best by default makes us title challengers again. So now it's about, can the players coming in just add that little bit extra? And I think they can. But I think relationships are going to be key. It's why it's important to get business done early. I think there's value in bringing in players that already know some of the players that you have and have those strong relationships and have similar philosophies and mindsets. And I think, we're trying to get that balance right.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I think that was very, very well summed up. We will leave it there. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit the like button, please subscribe to the channel, and please drop a comment and tell us, what do you think? Do you agree with me and Harry? Do you have different opinions? What do you think on our midfield rebuild this summer? Because it's a big, big task that we're undertaking, and we've got a big season ahead with big expectations. Harry, huge thanks for joining. Please tell everyone where they can find a bit more of you.
Thanks very much, mate. You can find me on the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, daily Arsenal podcast. Go over, check it out. And that's where I do the work I enjoy most. Let's say it that way.
So, yeah, it's a great show. I would highly recommend it. As I said, it was one of the reasons for me launching this channel and doing a solo show on YouTube. So huge thank you for that, Harry, and continue the great work that you do every day. As I said, please drop a like, subscribe, and please come back for more shows very soon. Have a great day. Goodbye.